rushed to surgery, and after the surgery, when the doctors came out to talk about his prognosis, they said to the masses that were listening, he'll be okay. But what they said next was of great interest and is probably a very memorable quote to anybody that knows anything about this particular situation. They said, but by the grace of God, had he sneezed, he would have been dead. In this very instance, God was protecting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and did not allow him to sneeze. Otherwise, the knife that was still stuck in his chest would have ruptured his aorta and caused him to bleed to death and thusly suffocate on his own blood. I don't know about you, but walking into a hospital will often cause you to sneeze simply because of the temperature of the hospital. And so in this instance, the fact that he did not sneeze is to me a sign that God was protecting him at that very moment, even in the midst of what was already a tragic situation.
Yes, sir.
But this speech was not just special because he discussed his near demise. He also forecasted his own death in this particular speech. He spoke about threats that he had received since arriving in Memphis, Tennessee earlier that day. I didn't say it already, but for those of you that don't know, this particular speech, I've been to the mountaintop, was delivered in Memphis, Tennessee, and it was designed to help people understand what it was that they ought to be doing in Memphis, Tennessee. He spoke in this particular situation about wanting to live a long life, but he acknowledged that he did not know if he would get to the promised land with the rest of the African Americans that he was speaking to. And if you don't realize it, him saying that he had been to the mountaintop and looked over into the promised land was a reference to dear old Moses. Because Moses went to the mountaintop and looked over into the promised land, but he didn't make it to the promised land. So Dr. King was saying in this instance, I know what the promised land looks like. I know that we're going to get there. But I also acknowledge that I might not get there with you. That was his own understanding of the fact that he may die before we reach the promised land. And here's what I'm here to tell y'all today, church. I'm going off script right now. As many years ago as he died, we still ain't got to the promised land. We still got a gang of situations keeping us out of the promised land.
Yes, Lord.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Lastly, he spoke in this particular speech about putting some things in order for the African American community. He wanted African Americans to unite with one another and to be better with and for one another. He was a preacher, not just a sociologist. That's why I like Martin Luther King. I'm a sociologist. But he was a preacher, not just a sociologist. So in his speeches, he would often reference the Bible, and his discussion of us being united went back to a discussion of Pharaoh in Egypt. And he talked about the fact that when Pharaoh wanted to divide the slaves, he caused them to fight one another. Sounds a little bit like what's going on in the African American community right now.
Lord.
We got all sorts of things we ought to be fighting against together, yet and still we killing and fighting each other. We breaking into each other's house and taking each other's gifts and stealing from one another and treating each other like we ain't never met each other a day in our life. Truth of the matter is, Pharaoh is still at work.
Yes, he is.
Causing us to fight against one another. And Dr. King was saying that we ought to unite and be better with and for one another. He wanted African Americans to stay focused on the issues at hand, not the peripheral stuff that can be used to distract them from what's going on and what's really important. He wanted them at that time to focus on the sanitation workers' strike, not all the other stuff that was on TV about stores getting broken into and whatnot. It said, as I was reading the history of it, that the sanitation workers' strike was going on, but on the news that day, all they talked about was a store getting broken into. They didn't give any coverage to the strike that was going on, that was going to be affecting everybody in Memphis. Not only was it going to affect those workers who were not going to get paid since they didn't get work, it was going to affect the folks who put their trash out and wasn't going to have their trash picked up. It was a widespreading situation that a lot of people didn't pay the proper amount of attention to. Church, I'm here to tell you that we got some of that going on today. We got a whole lot of situations going on around us that we're not giving proper attention to. We worried about the stuff that really don't matter. We worried about what's happening on Scandal one night. We worried about what's happening on Love and Hip Hop one night. Glory be to God, we ought to be paying more attention about what's going on with this president who's sitting up here acting like he's playing chess with our lives.
Yes. Amen.
We ought to be worried about some other elected officials who we put in there to speak on our behalf, and the very moment that they get an opportunity to show themselves to be who we think they are or thought they were, they do the exact opposite. Yeah, I'm talking about Joe Donnelly this morning.
All right.
Yeah, y'all might not know who he is, but he's a Democrat. And he was elected to tend to us, but he's the same one that's gone off and voted for this man, Mr. Neil Gorsuch, who don't care if black folks die in the snow because they leave their semi and go find some warmth. Y'all better start watching the news and reading the newspaper so you know what I'm talking about. Because at the point that you find yourself in court, having to go to the Supreme Court, it'll be that man that will vote against you, and you'll find yourself in worse shape than you were when you walked in.
All right. All right.
I'm just giving a little small sociology lesson, and I might get to preach at some point today. I don't know, but
go ahead.
Martin Luther King was calling these folks in Memphis to action. He was telling them now is the time for us to get busy.
Yes.
He was telling them you cannot sit and talk. You got to get up and walk. You can't just sit and talk. You got to get up and walk. Well, what does this have to do with Palm Sunday, Pastor? I'm glad you asked, because it has everything to do with Palm Sunday. I've heard it said that the great die young, and they often know when they're going to die. And while I cannot say with full certainty that Martin Luther King Jr. knew he would die the next day, that's why I said to you the date, April 3rd, because he was assassinated the next day after he gave this speech. Talking about he didn't know if he was going to get to the mountaintop. Somebody ought to be shouting right there, because he forecasted his own death less than 24 hours after somebody put a bullet in his head.
Yes, they did.
I don't know if he knew he was going to die that soon. I don't know if he realized the end was so near. I don't know about you, but for me, this is reminiscent of the last earthly days of my Savior, Jesus, who is the Christ. He is omniscient or all-knowing. I know that he knew exactly when and how he was going to die. And because of all this, before MLK was ever thought of or ever had a thought about his own death, Jesus the Christ set out prior to his own death to set some stuff in order.
All right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The Bible records, Pastor Bacon, later in the book of Mark, somewhere around the 13th chapter, that no man knows the day or the time that the Savior will return.
That's right.
And thusly it's important to always be ready for his return. Though he had spent his entire life preparing Christians for his departure and his return, I believe Christ made it a point this last week on earth, reminding those who believed in him of the manner in which they ought to be conducting themselves. I believe this with all of my heart. I believe Christ, like MLK would do 1968 years later, was letting folks around him know that he was about to leave. It was time for him to go, and that he had certain expectations for them to carry on without him in their earthly presence. I believe those of us who are serious about being Christians ought to pay strict attention to what Christ did on the first days of the last days of his life.
Yes.
I believe this wholeheartedly. It's not called Holy Week for no reason. It's called Holy Week because about what it was that Christ was doing in his earthly ministry. It's called Holy Week because this is the beginning of the end of Jesus Christ's earthly life.
Yes, Lord.
Yeah.
So let me show you some things that I found in the text. Pastor Bacon clowns me because he says that New Faith is a non-denominational church, and that's okay. Because like I always tell him, my license and ordination paperwork says missionary Baptist.
All right.
So at the end of the day, I'm still a Baptist preacher. Amen?
Amen.
So as Baptist preachers do, I'm going to show you 3 things. And then I'm going to sit down and get out your way. Amen?
All right. Amen.
First thing I want to show you in the text is that Christ did some cursing.
All right.
Christ did some cursing. Oh, everybody's looking at me like I ain't never seen Christ curse in the Bible. Well, he didn't curse in the manner that you're thinking of cursing right now. He didn't curse in the manner that some of us tend to curse. Folks didn't get quiet right there. They curse, right? My mama just told me you got to get rid of your cursing spirit. Because I tend to curse every once in a while. I don't know about y'all, New Vision, but my people know I'm going to give it to them straight, 100 with no chaser. I'm going to just tell you who I am because I'm glad that God chose to save me and to give me the ability to preach the gospel. Amen? And I'm not going to stand up here and act like I'm some perfect preacher walking around with no sin, walking around never doing anything wrong, walking around acting like everything's just okay all the time.
That's right. Amen. Amen.
Talk, Reverend. Talk.
But Christ did some cursing.
Yeah. Show me, Reverend. Show me, Reverend.
And I'm not saying, again, that he used foul language towards anything or anyone. I'm not suggesting that he went off and started using 4- and 5-letter words that we use when we get mad at each other. I am saying that he placed a curse upon a fig tree on one of the first days of the last days of his life. The Bible records that Christ was hungry departing Bethany and wanted to get something to eat, but upon encountering a fig tree, discovered there was no fruit on it. Let me put a linchpin right there. Let me tell you something about Christ's hunger. This is very, very, very important because even though Christ was as holy as he was also human. And that is the evidence of his humanity. His hunger is evidence of his humanity. Because guess what? Only humans get hungry.
That's right. Talk, Reverend. Talk, Doc.
His hunger was evidence of his humanity, but he got to this tree and didn't find no figs. And the Bible records that it wasn't the fig tree's time to be in bloom, or it wasn't the fig tree's time to be bearing fruit. But watch this, people of God. He cursed it and proclaimed that no one would ever eat from this particular tree again. And I don't know who I'm talking to this morning, but somebody in here needs to start cursing some things in their life. Somebody in here has some situations that are not producing fruit, and they need to curse those things and kill them dead in their tracks.
Amen.
Amen.
And you might make the argument it's not that time. Well, guess what? Leave it alone until it is time.
Amen.
Amen. I don't care what time it is. When Christ shows up, it ought to always be time.
All right.
Doesn't matter whether it's your time for harvest. Doesn't matter if it's your time for growth. When Christ shows up on the scene, you got to be ready. I already said it. No man knows the day or the hour. So you got to be ready at all times.
Oh, yes.
Who are you dealing with that's unable to produce fruit in your life?
All right.
Is it a man or a woman?
My Lord.
Too many of us have found ourselves attaching ourselves to people of the opposite sex that have no good in them for us. I'm not saying that they're a bad person. What I am saying is that they don't have any good in them for you. They're not producing any fruit for you. And so why would you find yourself attached to anything or anybody who cannot produce fruit that you need to have in your life?
Amen.
I'm here to tell somebody you need to curse that man or that woman. Not cuss them out, but curse them and tell them you'll never live here again.
All right.
And if it's not a romantic relationship, maybe it's just a friendly relationships. Some of us are friends and acquaintances and associates with folks that we ought not be associates with. Some of us are acquaintances with folks that we ought not be acquainted with. Some of us are friends with folks that we ought not be friends with. And we got to be strong enough and deliberate enough to say no more.
Amen. Amen.
I'm done with you. You're not producing no fruit in my life. In fact, I believe that you might be the very reason why I'm not producing no fruit in my own life. You can be associated with folks that can keep you from growing. You might be around some folks that are causing you not to be able to get to where you ought to be. All because of the things that they're doing. And if you allow yourself to continue to be attached to them, you'll stay right where you are or you'll fall dead yourself.
Amen.
What are you doing that's not producing fruit? What kind of decisions are you making in life that are keeping you from producing fruit? What are you doing on your job that is keeping you from being fruitful on your job? Here's a great question, because I ain't going to never preach a sermon staying on the outside of the church. I'm going to bring it on inside. Reverend Montgomery, what are we doing in the church?
That's right.
That's causing the church to be unfruitful. People want to get silent now because we think that, oh, well, he didn't hit nothing that I'm going through. He didn't say nothing that I'm having things and issues with. But what are you doing in your church?
All right.
Are you the one that's causing the church to be unfruitful? Here's a test for you. If you look around and you say everything is fine, I don't see any reason why the church ain't growing, maybe you ought to look in the mirror.
That's right.
I'm not saying that you ought to play the blame game. I'm simply saying that you ought to have a moment of self-introspection and take a look at yourself and see if you are where God has designed you to be, or if you're where he desires you to be on the path to spiritual maturation that will cause him to believe that sending more people is a good thing to do.
Come on.
Amen.
All of us ought to be cursing these situations and these actions the same way that Christ cursed that fig tree. We ought not allow them to continue to live in our presence. We ought to forego opportunities to speak life into these situations. We ought to be speaking death into situations that are not designed to help us. We ought to be speaking death into situations that are not fruitful for us. We ought to be speaking death into situations that are not fruitful for our churches. We ought to be speaking death into situations that are not fruitful for our families. We ought to be speaking death into situations that are designed to keep us stagnant where we are. We ought to be speaking death into any and everything that keeps us from progressing to where God would have us to progress.
Yes, Lord. Amen.
Speak.
Here's what I would suggest. Speaking death into those situations allows you to speak life into situations that will produce fruit for us and ultimately for Christ. I would encourage each of us to get busy with cursing unfruitfulness before we are found to be unfruitful ourselves and thusly cursed by Christ.
Amen.
Yeah. Kind of like Pastor Bacon when we were talking about being fired from a church. And we both agreed that we would rather be fired by a church than to be fired by God. Because it's one thing for mortal men to get upset with you and tell you they don't want you no more.
That's right.
But it's something entirely different when God gets upset and tells you, I don't need you no more.
That's right.
I'd rather have folks mad at me and tell me, Tate, you can go on, than to be standing there somewhere and have God tell me, Tate, you're done.
That's right.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So, after Christ did some cursing, point number 2, Christ did some cleansing.
Yes.
Watch this. He did some cursing, and then he did some cleansing. Christ sought to establish his house as a place of prayer, a place of worship, a place of refuge. And to do so meant he had to revisit his house and remind some folks of the purpose of its existence.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, we're going to step on some toes now. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah.
All right.
New Faith, long as y'all cool, we'll still have service at 9 a.m. next Sunday. New Vision, I hope y'all cool too, because, Baptist churches believe in congregationalism, and congregations is, well, Pastor Bacon, we don't want him in our building no more. But listen and realize that the things that I'm saying to you, I'm saying to help you and never to hurt you. Amen. Even if you end up with a couple of scratches or bruises, it's designed to help you and never to hurt you. So Christ is in his temple. He's doing some cleansing. He went into the temple and chased out the buyers and the sellers that existed.
That's right.
He turned over tables of folks that were changing money and selling doves at exorbitant prices. Jesus' mind was on reminding the people in the temple that the temple was supposed to be a place of solemnity and sanctity, not a place of sales, superstition, or sinful behavior. Too many of us have found ourselves interested in sales, superstition, and sinful behavior. What are you talking about, Pastor? I'm talking about some of the things that I hate the most. Sales that churches often engage in. What are you talking about, Pastor? I hate to see churches sell chicken dinners. I hate it with a passion. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I couldn't say it enough if I said it 35,000 times. I hate seeing churches have chicken dinner sales. Because the truth of the matter is, at the point that a church has a chicken dinner sale, all you did was cut your offering.
That's right.
That's all you did. Because everybody knows chicken dinner sale is $10 a plate. And most of us black folks come to church with an idea of what we're going to put in the collection plate anyway. I know when I get to church, I'm going to put $20 in the collection plate. But guess what? Now we serving chicken dinner. So now I only got $10 to put in the collection plate. Because I need $10 more to go downstairs and get my chicken dinner.
All right. Take time.
I can only put two dinners.
You right, man. You right.
Truth of the matter is, if we taught our folks to tithe and give their offerings, we'd be able to give away chicken dinners. We'd be feeding the people for free. Christ didn't never charge nobody to preach a sermon, and neither do I. But here's the truth of the matter. You in the church is out here selling things. We are thusly doing exactly what Christ ordered us not to do in his church.
Amen.
One of the reasons why we have so many unchurched people who lack understanding about what the church actually stands for is because all they hear about the church is the things that the church does wrong. And so they focus on those things, even when those things are not the greatest thing that the church does. You might be out here doing all sorts of service, but the moment that you do something wrong, all that goes away, and all they recognize is the wrong that happened.
Right.
Fact of the matter is, this is a great location, but I don't know nobody who's going to come down English and turn down Temperance looking for chicken.
All right.
They're going to go to the closest KFC, Popeyes, churches, or whatever other chicken place. These folks out here, JJ's, come from all the way overseas to fry chicken. Why is the church in the chicken frying and selling business?
All right.
Stay plain, Doc. Stay plain, baby.
We ought to be feeding our people for free. But that ain't the only thing that I hate to see. I hate to see churches having garage sales and bazaars. We, are people who claim to be poor, but we got an abundance of stuff we don't need. And then the church charges you $25 to have a table and 2 chairs set up on the parking lot so you can sell all your junk. Truth of the matter is, if you was really about God's business, you would take that stuff and hand it out to the people in the community and expect nothing but a blessing for having done so. We'd rather sit on the church parking lot with sun hats on and drink a little nasty warm lemonade and act like we're really doing a service for the community. God ain't appreciating that. If Christ came here and saw that, he'd turn all them $25 tables over and all your stuff would be all over the ground. And he would tell you, get up off your bottom and get out here in this community and clothe these people with these things that you claim not to want. You ain't worn in 35 years and thinking somebody ought to pay you for it. Truth of the matter is, most of the stuff that's at these bazaars don't even look that good. They ought to be glad to just give it away. Some of us end up going home with more than we came with.
Because you got to take it all back.
Because all those stuff didn't sell, but we saw some on Sister Mabel's table that we think we would look good in.
Yeah.
And Sister Mabel ain't wore since 1982. Oh, this style coming back. I'm going to take, yeah.
And they gave it to us.
Uh-huh. We would do better to spend our time in the community. Spend our time serving and helping folks. And here's what's really interesting about it, because some of us will say, well, I didn't engage in the chicken dinner sale, and I didn't buy no $25 table with 2 chairs. But all of us need to shift our thinking into high gear and start to operate in a fashion that's pleasing to God. Somebody's going to say, Pastor, I do already, but if you know of somebody who's not, and you haven't offered to correct them or to help them, you are just as complicit in their nonsense as they are. Amen. Because the fact is, you know better. And because you know better, you are witness folks acting out in church and allowing folks to continue to do so for fear of what they might say to us. Personally, I'm more concerned with what God will say to me for not correcting it than I am with the person whose feelings got hurt because I did.
All right.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if one of y'all gets mad at me, you can shoot me dead. But guess what? Whether I die in my sleep or die by bullet, I still got to stand before God and account for what I did while I was here. And so while your bullet might pierce my skin, your bullet might take me out, I still got to stand in front of God to account for what I did. And as much as I don't need nobody to shoot me right now, I really don't need God to look at me and say, you failed.
Amen. Amen.
I've already said it. I'm not worried about what mortal men say. Neither did Christ worry about the fact that priests and teachers of Mosaic law were looking for a way to kill him. He kept doing what he knew needed to be done.
That's right.
And we need to do the same thing in order to keep moving forward. So after Christ did his his cursing, and after he did his cleansing, the last thing that I saw in this particular text was that Christ did some counseling. He did some cursing, he did some cleansing, and then he did some counseling. Christ continued on with the first days of the last days of his life, and he continued to interact with his disciples. He continued to give them insight into how they ought to live and instruction about how they ought to believe. As the group continued to move around, Peter noted something about the fig tree that Christ had cursed. Peter noted that not only was the fig tree not producing fruit, but that it had completely dried up. And it was at this point that Christ instructed his disciples to always have faith in God. He was telling them that anything that you could ever ask for, as long as you ask for it in faith, is not an impossibility with God. But here's what you got to understand, people of God. What you cannot do is ask for something, call yourself having faith in it, and then get upset about the fact that God does not do it to the specification that you think it ought to be done. Sometimes things that we ask God to do are not necessarily his will. And then sometimes, most of the time, when you ask God to do something and he does not do it to your specification, it's because he's going to do it in larger order to his own specification.
Amen.
Jesus informed his disciples that they could make mountains jump into the sea if they only had faith in God to make it happen for them. Oh yeah, he was telling them that even things that you think are impossible, things that you think might be foolish, God can still make it happen as long as you have faith. Amen. People of God, we must remember exactly what faith is and how it differs from hope. The Bible says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. People will say, what exactly does that mean, Tate? Well, let me explain it for you. Hope is based on those things that you have seen happen already. But faith is based on those things that you have not seen happen before. You have a level of trust in God that says, I know that you can do this, even though I've never seen you do it before. I know that you are an almighty God and that you can do it whether I've seen it happen or not. we must be willing, church, to engage in what I call crazy faith.
Yes, Lord.
This is a sort of faith that's representative of our belief in God's power, his sovereignty, and his providence. I don't believe in that word that they say, coincidence. The only dence I believe in is God's providence.
Amen.
I don't believe things happen just by happenstance. I believe that they happen because God caused them to happen. And anything that he causes to happen, he causes to happen based on his own sovereignty and the ability to do any and all things that he chooses to do without having to worry about answering to anybody.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm getting ready to get out of here. But I want everybody in here to understand the way by which Christ wanted this faith to be executed was through prayer. Or the asking of God to do those things that we desire of him. Christ was careful to remind the disciples that in their pursuit of receiving those things they desire of God, they must be willing to forgive those around them who had wronged them.
Amen.
This is true for each and every one of us. All of us would do well to remember the same. I believe all of us remember the best way to talk to God in anticipation of receiving what we want is through prayer. But I believe we often forget that we must forgive our brothers and sisters in the process of going to God in prayer. The fact is, forgiveness is not for the person being forgiven. It is indeed for the forgiver. The truth of the matter is, if you forgive, you no longer have to walk around with the burden of unforgiveness on your mind. Further than that, God will forgive your sins as you forgive others who have sinned against you. That's in the Lord's Prayer. It says in the Lord's Prayer that we will please forgive us as we forgive those who have sinned against us. This is a twofold prayer. First of all, it's a request of God to forgive us according to the way that we have forgiven others. Second of all, it's a reminder to us that God will forgive us according to the way that we forgive others. So if you got some unforgiveness on your heart and on your mind right now, this is the best time for you to release it.
Yes, Lord.
Holy Week means so much, and this is but one of the things that Holy Week means. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm glad that Jesus took that ride into the city on that little donkey.
Yes,
I'm ready to get
yes.
out of here. I've hit my 3 points, and like most Baptist preachers, that means it's time for us to go. It means that it's time for me to bid you farewell.
Amen.
In other languages, they say, I bid you adieu. Sometimes we just simply say, I bid you good night. But I'm glad that he took that ride into the city on that little donkey.
Yes, yes.
And I'm
Lord.
glad that he took a little time to offer some final instruction to those who were willing to listen. I get really excited and glad about the fact that he found it important to remind some folks of what they needed to be doing despite the fact that he was going to be going away. But more than anything, I'm glad that he was given the authority to do the marvelous things that he did while he was here on earth.
Amen.
Even when people did not understand it or like it, I'm glad that he was given that authority.
Amen.
And unlike those men who questioned what he was doing, I'm glad that I know where Jesus' authority comes from. But more than anything, people of God, I'm glad for the end of the week.
Yes,
That we
Lord.
now refer to as Holy Week.
Yes, Lord.
The reason that I'm glad, folks, is because at the end of this week, we'll preach about it next Sunday. The end of this week is where Jesus Christ was dragged from Judgment Hall to Judgment Hall. Where he was spit on and yelled at. Where he was treated like a common criminal. He was found guilty of having done nothing wrong. And then the Bible records that they decided that it was time for him to die. Not knowing that it really had nothing to do with them, but everything to do with the divine plan. They strapped an old rugged cross to his back.
Yes, sir.
And that's when he took that long walk to a place called Calvary.
Amen.
Where he allowed himself to be stretched out on that old rugged cross.
Yes, yes.
They put
Lord.
nails in each one of his hands
Yes,
and
Lord.
nails down in his feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they allowed him to hang there only because he allowed them to put him there.
Yes, Lord.
But what they didn't realize was that they were making a grave mistake.
Yes, yes.
Because it was already written that he would have to die.
Yes,
But what the
Lord.
folks didn't realize was that when he decided to die, he didn't decide to die because he wanted them to kill him.
Amen.
He died because he decided to die for the remission of my sins.
Yes, Lord.
And the remission of
Amen.
yours.
Yes,
He decided to die because he knew that he had to die. He decided to die because it was written that he was going to die.
Yes.
He decided to die because he knew that he had to die.
Yes,
He decided to die until the sun wouldn't shine no more. He
Yes.
decided to die because the moon wouldn't shine no more.
All right.
He decided to die because that's what he had to do was lay there and die.
Yes.
But that didn't end the story right there.
That's right.
He allowed himself to be buried in a borrowed tomb.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again that he laid in this tomb all of Friday night, all of Saturday and all of Saturday night, but then early Sunday morning he got up with all power over heaven and earth in his hands. And they say, Pastor, why did he lay in a borrowed tomb? And I say, because when you don't need something long, you don't buy it, you just borrow it. And then when you're done with it, you give it back to whoever it was that it belonged to in the first place.
Yes, Lord.
But the story doesn't end there. He got up with all power over
Yes,
heaven
he
and earth
did.
in his hands. What
Yes,
they
he
didn't
did.
realize was that he had already said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me.
Yes.
They didn't realize that strapping into that old rugged cross was the greatest mistake they could have ever made in their life.
Yes.
Because when they nailed him to it and they lifted him up, that was the beginning of him drawing all men unto him.
Yes, yes, yes.
And when he got up on Sunday morning, he had all power over heaven and earth in his hand.
Yes,
And not only some power, he had all power over heaven and earth in his hand.
Yes, Lord.
And then he went to a place and grabbed hold of some folks that had belief in him and said, come on, we're going out of here.
Yes, Lord.
I got a better place for us to go, where the streets are paved with gold. Where every day is Sunday, where none of us have to worry about anything, where none of us have to deal with infirmities anymore, where none of us have to deal with death or destruction or degradation anymore.
Yes, Lord.
He took them to a place called heaven, and then he sat down at the right hand of his Father.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I really get excited about, especially me being me, because him sitting at the right hand of his Father means that every time I mess it up, he's going to petition his Father on my behalf and ask for one more chance to tell you every time you mess it up, he's going to ask for another petition for you on your behalf.
Yes, Lord.
If for no other reason than that, I'm glad that he rode into that city on that donkey. I'm glad that he gives me another opportunity. He lives on today, and because he lives, I get to live and face another day. I know it's cliche. They all say that, but here's the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is that it's true.
Yes, yes, Lord.
There would be no me or no you without him sitting up there where he's at.
Hallelujah. Yes.
And we got to stop simply saying that he's up there, because to say that he's up there prevents him from being down here. And prevent him from being down here means that we are preventing him from being everywhere. And I serve an everywhere kind of God. I don't serve just a up there God. I serve a God that's everywhere.
Yes, yes.
He can be where I was this morning and where I'm going this afternoon at the same time. And if I ever find myself in a
say, Pastor Bacon, I just turn around and go back to the last place that I saw him, knowing that he's going to be right there.
All right.
But if I really take my time and stop and look around, I'll realize that he never left me, because the Bible says that he'll never leave me. The Bible says he'll never forsake me. And that's the very reason why he took that walk into that city. It's the very reason why he took that walk to Calvary. It's the very reason why he got up on that old rugged cross. It's the very reason why he allowed himself to be buried in that tomb. It's the very reason why he got up on that third day. It's the very reason why he sits next to his Father in intercession. It's the very reason why each and every person in here this morning ought to be excited about what God has done for them.